A pleasant day to each and everyone. We are the Group 7 and I am Jenica Vicenta, one of your reporter for today's discussion. Today we will be talking about the Norse mythology and folklore, their creation myth, gods and goddesses. But before we proceed to our proper discussion, allow me first to introduce my group mates, starting with Renz Briones, Mary Rose Joyce Carlos, Alpha May Cura, and Jersey Sanchez. To formally start our discussion, let us first describe what is meant by Norse mythology. Norse mythology refers to the Scandinavian mythological framework that was upheld during and around the time of the Viking Age. Historians often date the Viking Age from circa or approximately around 790 to 1100 Common Era. Norse mythology is the myths and legends of the Vikings and of the people who live in what is now Norway, Sweden, the Netherlands, Germany, and many other parts of the Northern Europe. The Vikings were diverse Scandinavian seafaring raiders, conquerors, explorers, settlers, and traders who significantly impacted the cultures, beliefs, and literature of Europe, especially the Northern Europe. They spoke the Old Norse language, wrote in runes, and practiced their ancestral religion. The centerpiece of this religion was the what we call today Norse mythology, the set of religious stories that gave meaning to the Vikings' lives. These myths revolve around gods and goddesses with fascinating and highly complex characters such as Odin, Thor, and Loki. On the one hand, the main source that preserved the elements of Scandinavian mythology is the manuscripts of Prose Edda, also known as the Younger Edda, Snorri's Edda, or historically simply as Edda, is an Old Norse textbook written in Icelandic. The work is often assumed to have been to some extent written or at least compiled by the Icelandic scholar and historian by the name of Snorri Sturluson. It is considered the fullest and most detailed source of modern knowledge of Norse mythology, the body of myths of the North Germanic people. For us to have an introduction about the Norse mythology and folklore, let us first watch a video clip we found on YouTube about the Norse creation myth.
Before there was soil, or sky, or any green thing, there was only the gaping abyss of Ginnungagap. This darkness lay between the homeland of elemental fire, Muspelheim, and the homeland of elemental ice, Nilfheim. The flames from Muspelheim and the frost from Nilfheim moved ever closer, and they eventually met in the abyss. As the ice began to melt, the droplets themselves formed Ymir, the first of the giant kind. Ymir was capable of reproducing asexually, and as he slept, the sweat from underneath his arms formed two more giants. A third was later born, creating the first family of giants known as the Jotuns. From the ice emerged a cow named Audumbla. Her milk would nourish Ymir and the other giants, and in return the cow would be nourished by the blocks of ice. Audumla's licks uncovered Bori, the first god of the Aesir tribe. Bori would have a son called Bor, who would marry Besla, the daughter of the giant Bolthorn. They later had three half-god, half-giant children. We know them as Odin, Vili, and Ve. Odin and his brothers were concerned with how quickly the giants could reproduce, as they severely outnumbered the Aesir. The three brothers decided that their only option was to slay Ymir, and they waited till the giants slept before they began their assault. With all their strength, the brothers were able to overpower and slay Ymir. The blood which spouted from Ymir's body formed rivers, and these rivers drowned all but two giants. The surviving giants, Bergelmir and his wife, fled to the misty lands we now know as Jotunheim. The world as we know it in Norse mythology was created from the remains of Ymir's body. Odin and his brothers dragged Ymir's body into the abyss, and the 9 worlds were created. His blood formed rivers, his flesh and muscles became land, vegetation was formed from his hair, clouds from his brains, mountains from his bones, and his skull formed the sky. Ymir's skull would cover the entire new world, and the gods placed sparks from Muspelheim inside of the skull, and these would illuminate the world as stars. They built Asgard on the plains of Idavol, and this became the home of the gods, far away from Jotunheim, where the giants were allowed to live. The gods eventually formed the first man and woman from the trunks of 2 ash trees. These humans were to live in Midgard, and a fence was built around them to protect them from the giants of Jotunheim. The dwarves were formed when Ymir's body began to rot. The worms which crawled out of the remains became dwarves. The gods became worried that Ymir's rotting body would cause the sky to fall. They sent 4 dwarves, 1 in each direction, to hold up the sky. These dwarves were named after the cardinal directions: Nordi for north, Soundri for south, Vestri for west, and Austri for east. The remaining dwarves made their home underground and in caves located in Svartalheim. There was a man who had 2 children so bright and luminous that he named them Sul and Mani. The gods were angered by the man's arrogance, and so they took both children away from him. They placed both of the children in the sky, and they would become the sun and moon. The Norse myth of creation is one that has many conceptual meanings behind it, one of the most prominent being that life comes from death. The world was not created from nothing as it was in the Judeo-Christian myth. Rather than the gods creating the world, they first had to slay Ymir, who in this case represents the primal chaos, as he can reproduce without death or destruction. Ymir's kin, the giants, are constantly attempting to drag the world back into chaotic nothingness, and during the Ragnarok they do succeed in destroying the world. If you've enjoyed this video, then please consider leaving a thumbs up, as it helps promote the video and allows the channel to grow. If there's anything you'd like to discuss or have any ideas for future videos, then please let me know in the comments section. As always, I've been your host, Mythology and Folklore Explained.
And that is all about the Norse creation myth. As we proceed on discussing the Norse mythology and folklore, we will now go through the 9 realms in Norse mythology. There are 9 realms in Norse mythology. They are called Niflheim, Muspelheim, Asgard, Midgard, Jotunheim, Vanaheim, Alfheim, Svartalfheim, and Helheim. It is believed that the 9 worlds in Norse mythology are held in the branches and roots of a tree called Yggdrasil. These realms are the home of different kinds of beings, such as the Asgards, home of the gods and goddesses, or Jotunheim, the home of the giants. It's like what we have learned on the Norse creation myth. The first 2 realms, Niflheim and Muspelheim, were created out of Ginnungagap. The rest of the realms were created out of Ymir's body by Odin and his 2 brothers during the creation of the world. Let us first start with Niflheim, the realm of fog and mist. Niflheim means mist home or mist world, and it is the darkest and coldest region of all the realms according to Norse mythology. Niflheim is one of the 2 first realms, and it is placed in the northern region of Ginnungagap. Next in line is Muspelheim, also known as the Land of Fire. Muspelheim was created at the same time as Niflheim, but in contrast with Niflheim, it was created far to the south of the world in Norse mythology. Muspelheim is a burning hot place filled with lava, flames, sparks, and soot. Muspelheim is the home of fire giants, fire demons, and ruled by the giant named Surtir. On the third one, we now have Asgard. Asgard is the home of the gods and goddesses. In the middle of the world, High up in the sky is Asgard. It is the home of the gods and goddesses. Odin is the ruler of Asgard and the chief of the Aesir. Inside the gates of Asgard is Valhalla. It's the place where half who dies in battle will go for the afterlife. The other half goes to Folkvangir, which is ruled over by the goddess named Freya. Moving on to the fourth realm is Midgard, known as the home of the humans. Midgard, or the Middle Earth, is located in the middle of the world, below Asgard. Midgard and Asgard are connected by a rainbow bridge called Bifrost. Midgard is surrounded by a huge ocean that is known to be impassable. The ocean in the Midgard is occupied by a huge sea serpent, the Midgard serpent, and it is so huge that it encircles the world entirely. The first two humans, Ask and Embla, were sent to Midgard after Odin and his two brothers created them from the three lugs. On the fifth one, we now have Jotunheim, which is the home of the giants. Jotunheim is the home of the giants, which are also called as Jotnar. Just like Surtir from the Muspelheim, they are also one of the sworn enemies of the Aesir, or the gods and goddesses. Jotunheim consists mostly of rocks, wilderness, and dense forests, and it lies in the snow regions on the outermost shore of the ocean. Moving on to the sixth realm is Vanaheim, also known as the home of the Vanir gods and goddesses. The Vanir gods and goddesses is an old branch of gods. The Vanir are masters of sorcery and magic. They are also widely acknowledged for their talent to predict the future. Nobody knows where exactly the land Vanaheim is located, or even how it looks like. Next is the seventh realm called Alfheim, known as the home of the Light Elves. Alfheim is right next to Asgard in heaven. The Light Elves are described to be beautiful creatures. They are considered the guardian angels. The god by the name of Freyr is the ruler of Alfheim. The Light Elves are minor gods of the nature and fertility. The elves are also known for inspiring poets in art and music. Moving on to the second to the last realm, or the eighth realm, we now have Svartalfheim, which is considered as the home of the dwarves. Svartalfheim is the home of the dwarves, and they live under the rocks, in caves, and underground. Raidmar was the king of Svartalfheim until he was killed. Svartalfheim means dark fields. According to the myth, dwarves are masters of craftsmanship, and the gods of Asgard have received many powerful gifts. For instance, the magical ring Draupnir and Gungnir, which are known to be the spear of Odin. And the ninth realm, which is the last but definitely not the least, is Helheim, the home of the dishonorable dead. Helheim is the place of all the dishonorable dead, thieves, murderers, and those gods and goddesses who are not deserving and are not brave enough to go to Valhalla, neither to Folkvangir. Helheim is ruled over by the name of Hel, the daughter of Loki. It is described that Helheim is very grim and cold place, and any person who arrives here will never feel joy or happiness again. Hel will use all the dead in her realm at the Ragnarok to attack the gods and goddesses, and this will be the end of the world according to the prophecy. And that ends our discussion about the 9 realms in Norse mythology. Again, we have Niflheim, Muspelheim, Asgard, Midgard, Jotunheim, Vanaheim, Alfheim, Svartalfheim, and Helheim. Now, here is Miss Alpha Mikura to help us know more about the 3 most well-known characters in the Norse mythology, which are Odin, Loki, and Thor. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenica. As we continue, we will now discuss the three most popular gods in Norse mythology, and they are Odin, Loki, and Thor. Let us first start with Odin, the All-Father. Odin has many names and is known to be the god of wisdom, poetry, death, and magic in Norse mythology. He is the one-eyed All-Father who sacrifices his eye in order to see everything that happens in the world. Half of the warriors who die in battle are taken to his hall, which is called Valya. Although much about Odin's origins has remained obscure, consensus held him to be the son of the Vesla and Bor. Odin has two sons, Baldur by his first wife Frigg and Thor by Jord. Odin also has several animals. His two ravens, Hugin and Munin, fly around the world and report back what they see. Another is Sleipnir, the eight-legged horse that can run through all the worlds. And lastly, Geri and Freki are Odin's wolves. Odin was also mighty warrior. It was said that he never lost a battle. There were even some who believed he could never lose a battle. He sacrificed his eye in Mimir's well and hung himself in Yggdrasil, the tree of life, for 9 days and 9 nights in order to gain knowledge of other worlds and be able to understand the runes of the runic letters. During his sacrificial actions, he saw visions and received secret wisdom. The magical knowledge he gained made him able to cure the sick, calm storms, turn weapons against his attackers. He could see the future and commune with spirit and the dead. Odin also became a shape-shifter, meaning that he could change shape. He could take the form of snakes, eagle, and other powerful creatures. Additionally, Odin spoke in poetic verse and was granted an incomprehensible amount of knowledge of the universe. Next in line is Loki, the great trickster god of the Norse pantheon. Loki is often described as the blood brother of Odin, and sometimes as the adopted brother of Thor. The name Loki has long been likened to the Old Norse Logi, means fire. Loki's chief attributes were his wit and wile. He seldom engaged in physical combat and as such carried no weapons. He also lacked any well-attested charms, garments, or vehicles. But just like Odin, Loki was a preeminent shape-shifter among the gods and has the ability to change his shape and sex. On various occasions, he took the form of a salmon, a flea, and a fly. He also took the form of human beings, such as an old woman. In Norse mythology, although Loki's father was a giant who belonged to the sworn enemy of the gods and the goddesses, he is still included among the Aesir of the tribe of gods because Loki is represented as the companion of the great gods Odin and Thor, helping them with his clever plans but sometimes causing embarrassment and difficulty for them and himself. And lastly, we have Thor, the god of thunder. A paragon of strength and masculine virility, the storm god Thor was the fiercest of Norse deities. He was the son of Odin, the All-Father, and a member of the Aesir tribe of deities. Among his many abilities, Thor commanded storm and rain, and brought lightning and thunder. He wielded a war hammer called Mjolnir, and was thought to have red hair and a red beard. Brave, powerful, and righteous, Thor fully embodied the hero archetype. While Odin and Loki are shapeshifter, Thor faces problems with a hammer in his hand and violence in his heart. Whenever a fearsome beast or giants threaten their peace, the gods generally turn to Thor for intervention. The name Thor meant thunder and was an obvious reference to the god's alleged control of the phenomenon. In the fullness of his manhood, Thor married golden-haired Sif, a goddess associated with faith, family, and fertility. And that's all for our discussion about the three most popular gods in Norse mythology, namely Odin, Loki, and Thor. But before we end this, let us watch a video clip that we found on YouTube for us to have further understanding.
The One-Eyed God, the Wanderer, the All-Father, Odin. Many pantheons of deities, both fictional and from real-world mythologies, feature a singular god that acts as a king or leader over many other gods. In Norse mythology, this god is Odin, the All-Father, a central figure in the mythology and lord of many of the other deities in the pantheon. Odin was seemingly an important figure in the religions of certain Germanic peoples for centuries, and divided between all of his different aspects and representations, is known by over 200 different names. This video will focus on the various tales associated with Odin, as described by different Icelandic texts from around the 1200s. The authenticity of these texts in regard to the actual beliefs of the North Germanic peoples is a subject for debate. Within Norse mythology, Odin likely represents more attributes and concepts than any other deity, being associated with war, death, royalty, wisdom, knowledge, sorcery, and poetry. At the beginning of time, there were two realms, one filled with cold mist, and the other with raging flames, and a primordial void between the two. Eventually, the two intermingling elements combined in the void, and formed the first Jotun, Ymir, also known as a giant. Along with Ymir, there was also a giant cow that he suckled on for nourishment, and from his sweat came more giants, the Jotnar. The cow, on the other hand, licked the salt from the nearby ice, and from this licking came the first Aesir god, known as Buri. He had a son, who in turn married a Jotun, who gave birth to 3 sons, one of whom was Odin. Odin and his brothers then slew Ymir, the primordial giant, and the great rushing of blood that flooded from his body drowned the great cow, as well as the rest of the Jotnar, except for 2. These 2 went on to repopulate the race of giants. Odin and his brothers then took the corpse of Ymir and used it to help create the earth, using his flesh to make the soil, his bones to make mountains, and his teeth to make boulders and stones. They used his skull to create the sky, and sparks from the realm of fire to make the sun, moon, and stars. They created a race of light elves and a world for them, as well as the dark elves deep under the earth. They made sprites, spirits, and animals to inhabit the earth, and then they needed something to worship them, so they created humans. They built a fence using Ymir's eyebrows around the earth to protect the humans from the Jotnar, and finally they created the realm of Asgard, high above the world so that they could watch over their creations. He also married Frigg, who is said to know the fate of all, but says nothing of it. Odin fathered a number of sons, although exactly how many is unknown. Among these, he is the father of Thor, god of thunder, and Balder, god of light. He also took note of a certain Jotun that was capable of taking any shape he wished, to a far greater extent than other giants, known as Loki. Odin liked Loki's wit and charm, and asked him to become a blood brother, to which Loki agreed. The two swore to be true brothers to one another, and Odin brought Loki into Asgard, where he was accepted by the others. Loki, however, developed a great reputation as a spiteful trickster, trusted by neither the gods nor the giants, but always managed to talk his way back into their good graces. In these days, Odin would often walk among the humans in the disguise of a wise old wanderer, testing the hospitality of those he visits. He also utilized two ravens, Hugin and Munin, who traveled the world daily to provide him with information, giving him the name of Raven God. Odin was a relentless pursuer of wisdom and knowledge, and would sacrifice much in these pursuits. On one occasion, Odin went to the world tree, Yggdrasil, and hung himself from its branches for 9 days before finally learning the secrets of runic letters. These runes contained great power, and with their magic, he became the wisest and mightiest being in the cosmos. This, however, was not enough for Odin, and he craved more knowledge. From his throne, he spied upon the realm of the savage Jotnar, and noticed one that was very wise. This giant controlled a well of wisdom, where one of Yggdrasil's roots ended, and drank its waters every day to become ever wiser. Odin went to this Jotun, asking for a single drink from the well. The giant agreed, but only if Odin shared his all-seeing vision with him. Odin promptly plucked out one of his own eyes, placing it in the well before having a drink. From then on, he possessed only a single eye, but was truly the wisest of the wise. As life continued on Earth, and the gods continued to battle against the Jotnar, Odin's son Balder began to be troubled by ominous dreams that saw his life threatened. Due to the machinations of Loki, Balder was eventually killed, seemingly through an accident. Although none suspected Loki of playing a part in his death, his jealousy and spite eventually got the best of him, and he admitted openly to being responsible before fleeing. The gods demanded punishment of Loki from Odin, who used his all-seeing sight to locate him. The Aesir captured Loki and tortured him, bringing guilt to Odin for breaking his bond of kinship with Loki. This broken oath, among others in Asgard, led the gods to the events of Ragnarok, meaning doom of the gods, or twilight of the gods. Rather than being an apocalyptic end of days, Ragnarok instead foretold the end of a cycle of time, which would be followed by a rebirth, and eventually, another Ragnarok. For the Aesir gods, however, they knew their days were limited, Odin especially. Yggdrasil began to wilt, and brother turned against brother in this time of imminent destruction. Odin and the Aesir gathered as many strong and brave warriors as possible in the halls of Valhalla, and the Jotnar were growing ever bolder in their attacks. It was a hard time in the world of men, with death and depravity rampant, an age of axe and sword, with a deadly winter and the world waiting to fall into ruin. Finally, Ragnarok had come. The greatest battle that history could muster took place, and although Odin led a vast host of warriors into the war, he himself was swallowed up by the dread wolf Fenrir. In the end, the Aesir lost the battle, and the world was plunged into darkness as Yggdrasil broke and fell. And in time, a new day dawned, and the next cycle began, but people did not forget the deeds of the gods. Of course, there are a number of smaller tales related to Odin beyond just these. Stories of his relentless pursuit of wisdom, and his wanderings across the realms. These tales showcase Odin's imperfections and similarities to mortals, his willingness to trick or deceive others, and his legendary wisdom. Odin is the patron of many, from kings to outlaws, poets to berserkers, shamans to seers. Odin represents those who are willing to work and sacrifice to obtain that which they desire, and welcomed only the most worthy of warriors into his hall of Valhalla. The Norsemen were a hardy and capable people, and it is likely that their belief in figures such as Odin pushed them to continue to pursue strength and wisdom, much like the All-Father.
And that concludes our discussion about the Norse mythology and folklore. Hope you enjoyed listening. Thank you for watching.